I paid for my parents' anniversary party, but my dad gave me a special gift that left me speechless. I was 7 years old when I first realized I was invisible to my father. It was a crisp autumn evening, and I had just won first place in the district-wide science competition with a project on sustainable energy. My small hands clutched the blue ribbon as I scanned the auditorium, searching for the familiar silhouettes of my parents. Mom was there, beaming from the third row, but the seat beside her remained empty. "Your father had an emergency at work, sweetheart," she explained later, smoothing my hair as we drove home. "Daniel's baseball game went into extra innings, and your dad couldn't miss the final inning." I nodded, understanding even then the unspoken hierarchy in our family. Daniel was the firstborn, the son, the golden child whose achievements were celebrated with champagne and photographs that decorated our living room walls. Mine were acknowledged with distracted nods and polite smiles, when they were acknowledged at all. "It's not personal, Eliza," my mother would whisper when she caught me staring at the family photos where I stood in the shadows while Daniel bathed in the spotlight of my father's pride. "Your father just connects more with Daniel. Boys and their fathers, you know?" But it felt personal. Every missed recital, every forgotten academic award, every conversation that revolved around Daniel's latest accomplishment, they piled up like stones in my pocket, weighing me down as I tried to swim in the current of family dynamics. By high school, I had accepted my role as the afterthought. I stopped inviting my parents to award ceremonies. I stopped mentioning my straight A's. I stopped seeking approval that never came. Instead, I channeled my energy into building myself, piece by piece, into someone who didn't need validation from anyone, especially not from Robert Wilson, CEO of Wilson Manufacturing, who happened to share my DNA. I worked 2 jobs through college while maintaining a perfect GPA. I secured an MBA scholarship that covered my tuition at Harvard Business School. I launched my first consulting firm at 24, specializing in revitalizing struggling businesses. "That's nice, dear," my father said when I told him about my company over Thanksgiving dinner. His eyes never left the football game on TV. Daniel just secured a partnership at his law firm, youngest partner in the firm's history. I smiled tightly, cutting my turkey into precise squares. "That's great, Daniel. Congratulations." My brother at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Thanks, Liz. Your business sounds impressive, too." Perhaps that's why I never resented Daniel the way I could have. He wasn't malicious, just privileged with attention I never received. In some ways, he was as trapped in his role as the golden son as I was in my role as the forgotten daughter. When the invitation arrived for my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, I immediately called Daniel to coordinate our plans. As their children, surely we would be expected to handle the arrangements. "About that," he said, his voice laced with the familiar cadence of avoidance. "I'm swamped with this merger case. I can't take the lead on this." "We could split the responsibilities," I suggested, already knowing his answer. "Liz, I'm practically living at the office. I can barely make it to the party itself, let alone plan it. Can't you handle it? You're so good at organizing things." Translation: You're dependable. You're available. You're the backup plan. I wanted to refuse. To say, just once, that I had my own life, my own career, my own priorities. That my time wasn't less valuable simply because it wasn't spent at a prestigious law firm with my father's name smoothing my path. But I didn't. Because despite everything, I still harbored that childish hope that this time would be different. That if I created the perfect celebration, my father would finally see me. Not as the reliable daughter who could be counted on to fill in the gaps, but as Eliza Wilson, accomplished businesswoman, innovative entrepreneur, worthy of notice in her own right. So I agreed. I canceled a business trip to Singapore. I rescheduled meetings with potential investors. I poured over $18,000 of my own money into creating an event worthy of Robert and Margaret Wilson's 4 decades together. The venue was a historic mansion overlooking the harbor, with gardens that burst with my mother's favorite flowers. The menu featured dishes from their honeymoon travels across Europe. The guest list included relatives from across the country, friends they hadn't seen in years, colleagues who had watched their marriage withstand the test of time and industry pressures. Every detail was perfect, every moment choreographed to celebrate not just their marriage, but the family they had built. The family I desperately wanted to feel part of. The night of the party, I stood at the entrance, greeting guests in a blue dress that matched my mother's favorite color. Daniel arrived late, apologizing profusely, a hastily wrapped gift under his arm. "This is incredible, Liz," he whispered, surveying the transformed space. "How did you pull this off?" I shrugged, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Just did what needed to be done. What I didn't say was that I had done it all for one moment, the moment when my father would finally see me standing in the light instead of the shadows. The moment when the invisible would become visible. Little did I know that moment would change everything, just not in the way I had hoped. The anniversary party unfolded like a perfectly orchestrated symphony. Fairy lights transformed the garden into a starlit wonderland, while inside, the ballroom glowed with warm amber light that made everyone look 10 years younger. Laughter echoed through the halls, champagne flowed freely, and my parents moved through the crowd like royalty, accepting congratulations and reminiscing about their 4 decades together. I watched from the periphery, clipboard in hand, checking off tasks and quietly directing the staff. A sudden hand on my shoulder made me jump. "This is magnificent, Eliza," my mother said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I never expected anything like this. For a moment, warmth bloomed in my chest. "I'm glad you like it, Mom." "Like it? I love it." She squeezed my arm. "Your father is absolutely thrilled. He keeps telling everyone how lucky we are to have such wonderful children." I glanced across the room to where my father stood, surrounded by his business associates, with Daniel at his side. They looked so similar, both tall and broad-shouldered, with the same confident stance and charismatic smile that put everyone at ease. My father clapped Daniel on the back, laughing at something he'd said, pride evident in every gesture. "I should check on the kitchen," I murmured, slipping away before my mother could see the shadow that crossed my face. The party reached its pinnacle during dinner. The head table was arranged with my parents at the center, flanked by their closest friends and family. Daniel sat at my father's right hand, while I was placed at the far end, next to my mother's college roommate, who kept calling me Elizabeth despite my corrections. My father rose to give his speech, champagne glass in hand, and the room fell silent. "Margaret and I are overwhelmed by your presence here tonight," he began, his voice strong and clear. 40 years ago, we stood before many of you and promised to build a life together. We had no idea then what an incredible journey it would be." He spoke of their early struggles, the growth of his company, the joys and challenges of parenthood. The crowd hung on his every word, nodding and smiling at the familiar stories. "None of this would have been possible without family," he continued, turning to place his hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Our son, Daniel, has been the rock of this family. From the moment he was born, I knew he would carry our name with pride and purpose. And he has exceeded every expectation, becoming not just a brilliant attorney, but a man of integrity and vision." Daniel ducked his head, smiling modestly as appreciative murmurs rippled through the crowd. I took a long sip of my wine, keeping my expression neutral. "When I look at Daniel," my father said, his voice thick with emotion, "I see myself at his age, but with greater wisdom and compassion than I ever possessed. He is, in every way, the legacy I am most proud to leave to the world." The applause was thunderous. Daniel stood to embrace our father, whispering something in his ear that made the older man laugh and wipe at his eyes. When the noise died down, my father cleared his throat. "And of course," he added, almost as an afterthought, "we're grateful to our daughter, Eliza, who's always been dependable." The word hung in the air like a dead weight. Dependable. Not brilliant. Not exceptional. Not even particularly loved. Just dependable. Like a reliable appliance. A few guests glanced my way, their smiles uncertain, before quickly returning their attention to my father. I felt myself shrinking in my seat, becoming as invisible as I'd always been. In fact, my father continued, reaching into his jacket pocket, "We have a small token of appreciation for you, Eliza." He gestured for me to come forward. On wooden legs, I made my way to the center of the room, hyper-aware of the eyes following my movement. The silk of my dress suddenly felt too tight, the lights too bright. My father handed me a small cream-colored envelope. "Your special gift," he said with a conspiratorial wink to the audience. "I thought you'd like this." The room erupted in polite applause. I forced my lips into a smile, murmuring a thank you before retreating to my seat. "Open it, dear," urged my mother's roommate. "Let us see what it is." With trembling fingers, I slid my nail under the flap and extracted a glossy voucher. A spa day worth $250 at La Bellevue, the same chain spa they gifted to all their employees, and, I recalled with sudden clarity, to their mailman last Christmas. "How lovely," someone commented. "Perfect for you," said another guest. "You work so hard." I nodded, tucking the voucher back into its envelope. The conversation moved on, focusing once again on my parents and their remarkable love story. No one seemed to notice that I remained silent for the rest of the night, or that my eyes never quite met anyone else's. As the evening wound down, I stood near the exit, thanking guests as they departed. Most complimented the beautiful party, a few asking if event planning was my side business. I didn't correct them. Let them think I was a hobbyist party planner. It seemed less pathetic than admitting I was the overlooked CEO who had spent a fortune trying to buy her father's approval. Daniel approached as the last guests were leaving, loosening his tie with one hand and balancing a plate of leftover cake in the other. "Hey, superstar," he said, nudging me with his elbow. "You outdid yourself tonight." "Thanks." My voice sounded hollow, even to my own ears. Daniel hesitated, studying my face. "Are you okay? You seem off." "Just tired," I lied. "It's been a long day." "Well, don't worry about the cleanup. Mom and Dad hired a service for that. Let me drive you home." I shook my head. "I have my car. Besides, I need to make sure the staff gets the final instructions for tomorrow." "Always on top of everything," he said admiringly. "They really should have given you more credit tonight. This was all you." The belated acknowledgement felt like salt in an open wound. Where was this recognition when it mattered? Where was his intervention when our father had reduced my contribution to a single, dismissive word? "Good night, Daniel," I said, turning away. "Night, Liz. Love you." As I walked to my car, the weight of the envelope in my purse seemed to grow heavier with each step. But something else was growing too, a resolve that had been dormant for years, buried beneath layers of hurt and resignation. They had no idea what I was capable of, but they would soon find out. That night, I didn't cry. I had spent a lifetime of tears on my father's indifference, and I had none left to give. Instead, I drove to my office downtown, the city lights blurring through the windshield as my mind raced with crystallizing thoughts. The security guard looked surprised to see me at midnight, dressed in evening wear rather than my usual tailored suits. "Working late, Ms. Wilson?" he asked, scanning his badge to let me through. "Just need to check on something, Ray," I replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. My office occupied the entire top floor of a sleek high-rise, a fact my family remained oblivious to despite my occasional mentions of my new office space. I kicked off my heels, padded across the plush carpet to my desk, and unlocked the bottom drawer with a small key I kept on a chain around my neck. Inside was a black leather portfolio I had labeled Contingency Plan 3 years ago. I hadn't looked at it since, had hoped I would never need to. But tonight, the weight of that spa voucher in my purse and the echo of dependable in my ears had changed everything. I spread the contents across my desk. Confidential financial reports, corporate structures, acquisition strategies, and a complex web of LLCs tracing back to shell companies I had established during my second year of business school. While other students had partied on weekends, I had studied the intricacies of corporate law and financial engineering, building the framework for something I hadn't yet named. Protection, perhaps. Or power. Or tonight, As I traced my finger over the documents illuminated by the city's glow through floor-to-ceiling windows, it finally had a name: Justice. Few people understood the genius behind my consulting firm's success. On the surface, we specialized in revitalizing struggling businesses, identifying inefficiencies, streamlining operations, and restructuring debt. But beneath that legitimate operation ran a deeper current. For every business I saved, I acquired a small stake, often through subsidiary companies that appeared unrelated to me. I wasn't greedy. I didn't want control, just influence. Just enough leverage to ensure I would never be at the mercy of men like my father, who measured worth in terms of chromosomes and surnames rather than competence and vision. One particular file caught my attention: Meridian Supply Chain Solutions. For 35 years, Meridian had been the exclusive supplier for Wilson Manufacturing's most critical components. My father had built his business on their reliability, forging a relationship with Meridian's founder that predated my birth. 2 years ago, Meridian had teetered on the brink of collapse thanks to outdated systems and the founder's declining health. His children, more interested in their trust funds than the family business, had been ready to sell to the highest bidder, which would have been disastrous for any company dependent on their services, including Wilson Manufacturing. I had stepped in through a subsidiary of my consulting firm, injecting capital, restructuring operations, and preserving the connection that kept my father's business running smoothly. But I had done so under multiple layers of corporate anonymity. As far as Meridian's employees and clients knew, they had been saved by a faceless investment group based in Singapore. As far as my father knew, he had simply gotten lucky. I opened my laptop and logged into a secure server, entering a series of passwords that granted access to my most private business dealings. The screen illuminated with Meridian's current financials, now thriving under my silent direction, and responsible for over 80% of Wilson Manufacturing's supply chain. A week before my parents' anniversary party, I had completed the final phase of my long-term strategy, acquiring full ownership of Meridian and its 3 subsidiary companies. The move had been perfectly legal, meticulously documented, and completely invisible to anyone not directly involved in the transaction, including my father, who had no idea that his business now depended entirely on a company owned by his dependable daughter. I hadn't planned to use this leverage. Not really. It had been an insurance policy, a way to protect myself if my father's business decisions ever threatened my own financial interests. But the spa voucher had changed that calculation, transformed potential energy into kinetic force. I turned to my private office bar and poured myself 2 fingers of the same scotch my father favored. The amber liquid burned pleasantly as I formulated my next move. By morning, the contract between Meridian and Wilson Manufacturing would expire. The automatic renewal that had been in place for decades would mysteriously malfunction, requiring new terms to be negotiated immediately. New terms that I would dictate. I spent the next several hours drafting documents, consulting with my attorney on secure chat, and preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most significant confrontation of my life. As dawn broke over the city skyline, I changed into the spare clothes I kept at the office. Not my usual conservative business attire, but a power suit in deep crimson with stiletto heels that added 3 inches to my height. Today, I would not be invisible. I arrived at Wilson Manufacturing headquarters just as the early shift employees were filing in. The receptionist, who had known me since childhood, did a double take at my appearance. "Eliza, we weren't expecting you today. Your father's in a crisis meeting." "I know," I interrupted smoothly. "I'm expected." I didn't wait for her response, striding past the reception desk toward the executive elevator. My phone buzzed with a notification. My father had just received an urgent email from Meridian's new management, requesting an immediate meeting to discuss the lapsed contract. The elevator door slid open to reveal the executive floor where I had once played hide-and-seek during school holidays, when my father had been too busy to arrange childcare, but not too busy to take Daniel to baseball practice afterward. The wood-paneled hallway ended at a conference room where raised voices could already be heard. "What do you mean there's no renewal?" "There's always a renewal. We've had the same arrangement for 35 years. My father's voice, strained with rare panic. "Sir, the system shows the contract expired at midnight." The new owners are insisting on renegotiation. This from Carl Jennings, the operations manager who had been with the company since before I was born. New owners? What new owners? Richard would never sell without telling me first. I took a deep breath, my hand on the door handle. In my other hand, I clutched a leather portfolio containing the new contract terms, reasonable but firm, designed not to destroy, but to recalibrate. To finally, irrevocably, shift the balance of power. I pushed open the door. 6 heads turned toward me, expressions ranging from confusion to relief to, in my father's case, irritation. "Eliza, not now," he snapped. "We're dealing with a situation." "I know," I replied, my voice steady as I placed my portfolio on the polished conference table. "That's why I'm here." He frowned, not understanding. "Did your mother send you?" "I told her I'd be late for lunch, but this is an actual emergency." "No, Dad," I said, meeting his eyes directly for what felt like the first time in my life. I set myself. "We need to talk about Meridian Supply Chain Solutions." "What would you know about?" "I own it," I interrupted, savoring the confusion that washed over his face. "And we need to discuss your new contract terms." Silence engulfed the conference room. My father's face cycled through emotions, confusion, disbelief, anger, before settling on a dismissive smirk that I had seen directed at competitors, critics, and anyone else who had ever challenged his authority. "That's impossible," he said finally. "You can't own Meridian." "I assure you I do." I opened my portfolio and slid the ownership documents across the table. As of last week, I own Meridian Supply Chain Solutions and its 3 subsidiaries outright. Carl Jennings adjusted his glasses, studying the paperwork with growing alarm. "These appear to be legitimate, Robert." My father snatched the documents, scanning them with increasing agitation. "This is some kind of mistake. Or a prank." He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Is this because of last night?" "That party was lovely, Eliza, but if you're upset about something—" "This isn't about the party," I interrupted, though we both knew it wasn't entirely true. "This is about business. Your company's contract with Meridian expired at midnight. I'm here to discuss the new terms." "New terms," he echoed, his voice dangerously low. He turned to his executive team. "Give us the room. Now." The 4 other executives filed out, Carl shooting me a bewildered glance as he closed the door behind them. For a moment, my father and I simply stared at each other across the glossy expanse of mahogany. "How long?" he asked finally. "How long what? How long have you been planning this corporate sabotage?" I laughed, the sound brittle in the quiet room. "Sabotage? I saved Meridian when it was circling the drain 2 years ago. Without my intervention, your supply chain would have collapsed then, and Wilson Manufacturing with it." He leaned forward, his knuckles white against the table. "Why didn't you tell me?" "If you knew how important Meridian was to this company, to our family's legacy." "Legacy." I cut in, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. "You mean Daniel's legacy?" "I've never been part of that equation." "That's absurd. You're my daughter. Everything I've built has been for both of you." "Really?" I removed the spa voucher from my purse and placed it on the table between us. "Is that why you spent 40 years treating me like an afterthought? Why you gave me a generic gift card while telling the world that Daniel is your true legacy?" My father's face flushed. "Don't be so sensitive. It was a nice gift. It was the same gift you gave our mailman at Christmas." He had the grace to look embarrassed, but quickly recovered. "This is business, Eliza. You can't let personal feelings interfere with." "It's always been personal with you," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. "Every overlooked achievement, every dismissed success, every time you introduced me as my daughter, the consultant, while spinning lengthy explanations of Daniel's legal brilliance. It was personal when you missed my graduation to attend Daniel's baseball tournament. It was personal when you forgot to include me in the family portrait for your company's annual report. That was an oversight." "Exactly. I've been one long oversight in your life. And now you're experiencing what that feels like." My father pushed back from the table, standing to pace the room. "What do you want?"
"Money?"
A position at Wilson Manufacturing? Is that what this is about?
No.
I remained seated, watching him move. I want you to understand what you've done. Not just to me, but to your business. You've been so blinded by your favoritism that you didn't realize your dependable daughter was building an empire right under your nose. One that now holds your company's future in its hands. He stopped pacing, his expression shifting to something I'd never seen directed at me before, respect mingled with fear. "What are your terms?" he asked, his voice suddenly all business. I opened my portfolio again and removed a contract, pushing it across the table. "These are the new supply terms for Wilson Manufacturing. The pricing structure has been adjusted to reflect current market realities." He glanced at the figures and paled. "These prices would decimate our profit margins." "Only under your current operational model," I replied. "Section 3 outlines recommended modernizations that would actually increase your margins by 12% within 6 months. My consulting firm can assist with the transition for our standard fee." My father leafed through the contract, his brow furrowed. "You've thought of everything." "That's what I do. That's what I've always done," while you were busy admiring Daniel's jump shot. He looked up sharply. "And if I refuse these terms? Then Meridian will be unable to fulfill Wilson Manufacturing's supply needs effective immediately. Based on your current inventory levels, production would halt within 3 days. Your competitors would be delighted to step in and fulfill your abandoned contracts." My father sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 65 years. "You would destroy your family's company? Everything I've built. I didn't create this situation," I said quietly. "I'm simply responding to it. For years, you've taken me for granted, assumed I would always be there in the background, dependable Eliza picking up the slack. Now you're discovering the cost of that assumption." A tense silence stretched between us. Outside the windows, clouds gathered, casting the room in shadow. "You're more like me than I realized," my father said finally, his voice a mixture of pride and resignation. "No," I corrected him. "I'm better. Because I understand what you never did. True power isn't about dominance. It's about leverage." The intercom buzzed, and his assistant's voice filtered through. "Mr. Wilson, your son is on line 1. He says it's urgent." My father's eyes never left mine as he pressed the button. "Tell him I'll call back. I'm in the middle of an important negotiation." As the rain began to fall against the windows, my father reached for a pen. "I need 48 hours to review these terms with my team." I stood, gathering my portfolio. "You have 24. And when you call Daniel back, you might suggest he brush up on corporate acquisition law. He's going to need it." I was halfway to the door when my father's voice stopped me. "Eliza." He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Last night, the party. It was extraordinary. Everything was perfect. I should have said that." I turned, my hand on the doorknob. "Yes," I said simply. "You should have." As I walked out of Wilson Manufacturing for what felt like the first time on my own terms, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Dad sounds freaked. What's going on? Call me." I smiled, slipping the phone back into my pocket without replying. He would find out soon enough. They all would. By evening, my phone had accumulated 23 missed calls, 15 from Daniel, 5 from my mother, and 3 from my father. I ignored them all, settling instead into my apartment's window seat with a glass of wine, and the city spread out before me like a circuit board of light and shadow. The rain that had begun during my meeting with my father had intensified into a proper storm, lightning occasionally illuminating the skyline in stark relief. It matched my mood, the calm at the center of turbulence, the strange peace that comes after releasing a burden carried too long. My intercom buzzed at precisely 8:17 p.m. I checked the security camera to see Daniel huddled under an umbrella, his normally impeccable suit rumpled, and his expression harried. "Liz, I know you're home. Your doorman told me you came in hours ago. Please, we need to talk." I sighed, pressing the button to let him in. Some conversations couldn't be avoided indefinitely. When I opened my door, Daniel looked like he'd aged 5 years since the anniversary party. "Jesus, Liz. What did you do?" "Come in," I said, stepping aside. You're dripping on the hallway carpet. He entered, taking in my apartment with new eyes. The original artwork, the custom furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the most expensive part of the city. I've never actually been to your place before, he realized aloud. You've never asked to come, I replied, pouring him a glass of wine without asking if he wanted one. Dad's told you everything, I assume? Daniel accepted the wine, downing half of it in one swallow. He says you're trying to destroy the company, that you've secretly taken over our main supplier and are holding it hostage. He ran a hand through his damp hair. Tell me that's not true. Parts of it are true. The destruction part is melodramatic, which is typical of him. Explain it to me then. Because Dad is absolutely losing it, and Mom, he broke off, shaking his head. Mom what? She's not saying much. Just sitting in the garden room, staring at the rain. She asked me to find you. A twinge of guilt surfaced, but I pushed it away. This wasn't about my mother, who had been a passive witness to my father's favoritism for decades. I gestured to the couch, and Daniel sat, placing his wine glass carefully on a coaster. Ever the good son, following the rules even in crisis. I acquired Meridian Supply Chain Solutions and its subsidiaries through entirely legal means. I began, sitting across from him. I saved the company from bankruptcy 2 years ago, and last week, I completed the acquisition of remaining shares. But why? Daniel asked, looking genuinely perplexed. If you wanted to be part of the family business, why not just talk to Dad? I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. Because I've been talking to Dad my entire life, and he's never really heard me. That's not fair. He loves you. Does he? Or does he love the idea of me? The dutiful daughter who handles things so he doesn't have to think about them? The reliable backup plan when the golden son is too busy. Daniel flinched. Don't call me that. Why not? It's what you've always been. The golden son. Dad's legacy. His pride and joy. Do you know what I've been? Dependable. Like a well-made appliance. You're twisting things. Am I? I crossed to my desk, pulling out a folder I'd compiled years ago. Senior year, you got AB in AP Chemistry. Dad hired you a private tutor and took you fishing when you pulled it up to AB+. That same semester, I was valedictorian. He forgot to attend the ceremony. Daniel stared at the folder, which contained dozens of similar incidents meticulously documented. You've been cataloging these things? Not intentionally at first, but after a while, the pattern was so obvious I couldn't ignore it. He pushed the folder away. This is obsessive, Liz. And using it to justify corporate espionage. It wasn't espionage. It was strategy, I corrected. And it wasn't even aimed at Dad originally. I was building something for myself, creating security that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or attention. And the anniversary party? Was that part of your strategy too? I looked away, the question striking closer to the truth than I wanted to admit. The party was hope. One last attempt to be seen. Dad saw it. We all did. It was incredible. He gave me a spa voucher, Daniel. The same one he gives to the mailman. Daniel winced. Okay, that was thoughtless. But that's just Dad being Dad. You know he's not good at that stuff. He managed to be good at it for you. We fell silent, the rain beating against the windows the only sound in the apartment. Daniel studied his hands, his lawyer's mind visibly working through the situation. What happens now? He asked finally. Are you really going to destroy everything Dad built? No, I said softly. I'm going to fix it. What does that mean? It means Wilson Manufacturing has been running on outdated systems and inflated supplier costs for years because Dad refuses to modernize. It means the company could be twice as profitable with the right leadership. Daniel's eyes widened. You want to take over? I want a seat at the table, I corrected. Equal to yours. I want acknowledgement of what I've accomplished, not as his daughter, but as a businesswoman who built something substantial while he wasn't looking. And if he refuses? He won't, I said confidently, because despite his flaws, Dad is a pragmatist. He knows I've outmaneuvered him, and deep down, I think there's a part of him that's impressed. Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me with a strange expression. "It's Mom. She's at your building, coming up now." My heart rate quickened. "You told her where you were going?" "I didn't have to. She called your doorman directly." Moments later, a gentle knock at my door signaled her arrival. I opened it to find my mother, rain-damp and tired-looking but composed. "Eliza," she said simply. "Mom." She stepped inside, taking in the apartment with the same surprise Daniel had shown. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. "It suits you. Strong. Elegant. Unapologetic." Daniel looked between us nervously. "Mom, Liz was just explaining." "I know what she did," my mother interrupted. "Your father finally told me everything, including things I should have seen for myself years ago." She moved to the window, watching the city below. "I allowed it to happen," she said quietly. "All these years, I saw how he favored Daniel, how he overlooked you. I told myself it wasn't intentional, that you were so independent you didn't need the attention Daniel did." She turned to face me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I was wrong. We were both wrong." The simple acknowledgement, after a lifetime of silence, loosened something tight in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first step toward it. "Why are you here, Mom?" She straightened, suddenly looking more determined than I had ever seen her. "Your father will be here in 20 minutes. I suggest we all prepare for a long overdue family meeting." I had imagined this confrontation countless times. My father, backed into a corner, finally forced to acknowledge my worth. In none of those scenarios had I pictured us sitting in my living room, rain lashing the windows, my mother pouring tea, as if we were having a normal family gathering. The doorbell rang precisely on time. My father had always valued punctuality, especially in crisis. When I opened the door, I was struck by how diminished he looked. Robert Wilson, titan of industry, seemed smaller somehow, his customary confidence replaced by something I'd never seen in him before: uncertainty. "Eliza," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Dad." I stepped aside. "Come in." He entered, taking in my apartment with the same surprise Daniel and my mother had shown. "This is impressive." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." We joined the others in the living room, an awkward tableau of family secrets suddenly exposed. My father sat beside my mother on the sofa, while Daniel perched anxiously on an armchair. I remained standing, needing the physical advantage. "I've reviewed your contract," my father began without preamble. "My legal team says it's airtight." "I know. They also said the terms are surprisingly reasonable, given your leverage. You could have demanded much more." I crossed my arms. My goal was never extortion. "Then what is your goal, Eliza?" he asked, spreading his hands. "To punish me? To embarrass me in front of my colleagues? To prove something? To be seen?" I said simply. "To be valued for who I am, not for how useful I can be to you, or how well I fulfill the role of the supportive daughter." My father exchanged a glance with my mother, who nodded slightly. "Your mother has helped me understand some things," he said, looking uncomfortable, "about how my attention has been unequally divided over the years." Daniel shifted in his seat. "Dad, I never meant to." "This isn't about you, son," my father interrupted, his voice unusually gentle. "This is something I created." He turned back to me. "Something I need to fix." I had prepared for anger, for negotiations, for threats. I hadn't prepared for this strange vulnerability from a man who had always seemed impervious to self-doubt. "You've built something remarkable," my father continued, gesturing to encompass my apartment, my business, my life, without any help from me. While I was busy grooming Daniel for a legacy he didn't even want. "Wait, what?" I looked at my brother, who had the grace to look sheepish. "I've been trying to tell him for years that corporate law isn't my passion," Daniel admitted. "I wanted to practice environmental law, but Dad was so set on me joining the family business eventually." "Meanwhile," my father continued, "my brilliant daughter was building an empire right under my nose, and I was too blind to see it." He looked directly at me, his eyes clearer than I'd ever seen them. "I'm proud of you, Eliza." Not because of what you accomplished, but because you didn't let my failures stop you from becoming extraordinary. The words I had waited a lifetime to hear landed strangely, like rain on parched earth, welcome but almost painful in their intensity. Thank you, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. But words aren't enough. Not after all this time. My father nodded, reaching into his briefcase to withdraw a folder. I know. That's why I had my team draft this. He handed me the document. As I read, my eyebrows rose involuntarily. A board position, I said, looking up, and a substantial equity stake. You've earned it, he replied. Not because you're my daughter, but because you're the most qualified person I know to help lead Wilson Manufacturing into the future. He hesitated. That is, if you're willing to work with me rather than against me. I studied the document, noting the careful legal language that ensured my position could not be revoked or diminished without majority shareholder approval. It was, in its way, a surrender document. And Meridian? I asked. Remains yours, he said, with a fair contract between our companies that benefits both. No more favorable terms that hurt your bottom line. My mother leaned forward. Eliza, this isn't just your father's idea. The entire board voted unanimously after reviewing your business record. They were quite impressed by what you've accomplished. I sat down, suddenly needing the support. This outcome, professional respect rather than mere parental pride, was more than I had dare hope for. I'll need time to review the proposal with my legal team, I said, falling back on business language as a shield against the emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Of course, my father agreed. Take all the time you need. A strange silence fell over us, for people who had lived parallel lives while calling themselves a family, now faced with the challenge of becoming something real. What happens now? Daniel asked, breaking the tension. With us, I mean, as a family. My mother reached for my hand, then my father's, creating a physical connection between us. We start over, she said simply. We learn to see each other as we truly are, not as the roles we assigned. I'd like that, I said softly, surprising myself with the truth of it. As the storm outside began to subside, my father cleared his throat. There's one more thing. He reached into his pocket and extracted a small wrapped package. I know it's belated and entirely insufficient, but I got you something. A real gift this time. I unwrapped it carefully to find a small silver compass, old and clearly valuable. My confusion must have shown on my face. It was my grandfather's, my father explained. He gave it to me when I started my first business. He said it would help me find my way when the path wasn't clear. He swallowed visibly. I should have given it to you years ago. You've always had a better sense of direction than any of us. I closed my fingers around the compass, feeling its weight, not just of metal, but of history and, finally, recognition. Thank you, I said, meaning it. Outside, the clouds parted, allowing moonlight to silver the rain-washed city. Not a perfect ending. Those exist only in fairy tales, but perhaps a perfect beginning.